And all of a sudden the door opened and Vince walked in through the door. And he came in, he had a bottle of Matus wine in his hand and his eyes were staring. So he stood there for a minute and he took a pill, swigged it down with wine and he said, "You all think I'm Vince Taylor, don't you?" He said, "Well, I'm not. My name is Matus. I'm the son of Jesus Christ."
Vince Taylor, born Maurice Brian Holden, was an early rock and roll frontman. Although he struggled to gain mass popularity in his birthplace of England, he found success in France where he was idolized and dubbed Le Diable Noir, the Black Devil. His most notable achievement, other than providing the blueprint for Bowie's Ziggy Stardust, more on that later, was writing and recording Brand New Cadillac, which went largely unnoticed upon its release but is now recognized as a classic. Although he claimed to be an American, he was actually born in Isleworth, which is in West London, on July 14, 1939. When he was 7, his family moved to New Jersey before eventually settling in California. It's here in America that Vince's journey to becoming the Black Demon of rock begins. In 1956, he saw Elvis Presley perform in Santa Monica and was quickly fascinated with all things rock and roll, listening to records by Bill Haley and others before trying his hand at it himself by singing at parties, proms, and any place he could. Vince was smitten with rock, plain and simple. Vince then made a trip back to London where he heard a record by Tommy Steele, one of the more popular British rockers in 1957. Tommy Steele is, in comparison to his American counterparts, everything you'd imagine a 1957 British star to be. Polite, subdued, homely, and very much not a threatening rock and roll idol. This gives Vince an idea. With his knowledge of American rock and roll and his near American accent, he has a shot at becoming a bona fide star. By the way, this is what Vince's American accent sounded like.
I enjoy it so far and everything's been great, but it's very difficult for anybody to say just how long you will remain popular with. It's up to the people, I hope, for a long time.
As American as mincemeat pie. Wanting to know more about the British rock and roll scene, he met Paul Taylor, who recommended that Vince check out the Coffee Two Eyes in London, a hotbed of early skiffle and rock and roll, and also a frequent stage of one Mr. Steele. Once at the Two Eyes, he made connections with the locals and was able to form a backing band. You'd think that being completely unestablished without any sort of connections or even being blessed with a phenomenal singing voice, that it'd be hard for Vince to do this. But it's the late 1950s and having the look can get you a long way. And boy, oh boy, did Vince have the look. You see, Vince had a serious leg up on any would-be British-born competition. Why? Well, while Vince was in America enjoying square meals, dental plans, and decent health care, his British counterparts were scrawny due to post-war rationing, had terrible complexions, and those British teeth. So here comes Vince with his exotic American accent, perfectly coiffed jet black hair, jaw chiseled out of marble, symmetrical face, well-fed physique, and perfect teeth. He pretty much just looks like he was plucked off of a Hollywood lot. Put simply, a peacock among pigeons. Vince assembled his band called the Playboys, and they started to play the Coffee Two Eyes on the regular. Vince also undergoes his first molting by discarding the dead skin of his birth name Maurice, and chooses a new alias. There are a few stories and theories as to how Vince actually arrived at his new name. One is that he simply lifted the name Vince from Vince Everett, Elvis's character in Jailhouse Rock. Pretty plausible. And also Gene Vincent, who he obviously appropriated other things from. But as for me, I like the last explanation the best because it provides story symmetry. See, Maurice was a smoker, and his brand, a classic filterless smoke recommended by 19 out of 20 paid doctors in the 1960s.
What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?
On each package, under the logo, read the Latin phrase, In hoc singo vinces, meaning, in this sign thou shalt conquer. Vince Taylor and his Playboys performed regularly and gained enough interest to be signed by Parlophone in November 1958 and released their first record.
You can run like a rabbit, fly like a bee. No matter what you do, you'll never get away from me because I'm right behind you.
While Vince's performance as a vocalist on Right Behind You Baby is passable, it does feature a blistering 24-bar guitar solo played by Tony Sheridan, which allows the record to gain a little interest. In December, Vince gets his first real break and is asked to appear on the popular ATV show, Oh Boy.
Okay, come and get it, it's Oh Boy!
Here's what bassist Licorice Locking, probably the greatest name in rock and roll, said about the appearance.
We wore black suit, black shirts, white tie, black trousers, black and white shoes, and a black and white check cap. Can you imagine? We went for it, boy. Vince was magnificent.
So, dressing in his soon-to-be iconic black shirt with the top buttons undone, he performs on Oh Boy and lets the sex do the talking. Unfortunately, and that will become a refrain in the life story of Vince, Jack Good, host of Oh Boy, thinks that Vince's hair is too long and tells him to cut it before his next appearance. And Vince says no. And as a result, loses any hope at any future Oh Boy appearances. This, however, doesn't faze Vince, as he proceeds to write his masterpiece, a little song about jealousy, paranoia, and ego. Brand New Cadillac is weird for a few reasons. The first of which is that Vince really wasn't a songwriter. He was perfectly content to cover old Sun record B-sides. But for some reason, he brought it to the Playboys, and the new lead guitarist Tony Scotty Moretti quickly came up with this spooky dark lead part that weaved in the middle of the road like a drunk driver. The second reason it's weird is that although the band thought it would be a smash, they, for some reason, decided to make it the B-side. Now, the idea of an A-side and a B-side might not seem consequential today in the era of streaming, but back then, an A-side was everything. Disc jockeys were the tastemakers, and putting a song on the A-side signaled to them that this was it. And the B-side was traditionally filler to make up for the lack of having any music on the B-side. Instead, for the A-side, the group recorded the Johnny Ace classic, Pledgin' My Love.
Forever, my darling, my love will be true, always and forever.
A perfectly safe, sane, and lovely ballad written to peel off pants in parked cars. So, although Vince was a fantastic performer, he often struggled with simple concepts like pitch or timing or rhythm. He could get by in live situations, but in the studio, nowhere to hide. To make matters worse, Johnny Ace was a terrific singer, and Pledgin' My Love was designed to show off a beautiful voice. He was less Johnny Ace and more Johnny Rotten. And a third strike went against the would-be smash hit Brand New Cadillac. It was banned on the BBC.
It was banned because it had the words Cadillac and Ford in it, and we weren't allowed to advertise on the BBC. They called it advertising, you see.
And so, on the verge of triumph, Vince once again is dealt a bad hand. Partly due to bad choices, and partly due to bad luck. As it was considered a flop, Vince was promptly dropped from Parlophone, and most of the Playboys left for greener pastures. Vince, however, didn't give up, and he forms a new incarnation of the Playboys, featuring Bobby Woodman on drums, who quickly becomes his best friend. After visiting his family in the States, some touring and benefit shows, he finally gets another break and performs on the ABC show Wham! On April 30th, 1960, which is fruitful because a small label out of Belgium signs Vince and adds him to their new expanding roster to break into Britain, probably unaware of his previous flops. Vince and the Playboys enter the studio and record a follow-up of sorts to Brand New Cadillac with Jet Black Machine, a cacophonous ode to motorheads. Vince was, like most rock stars, a little eccentric and a little unreliable. And on the eve of a large tour in November 1960, he, without notice, skipped town and went back to visit his family in the US, leaving the band to figure out what to do. And this wasn't anything new. He would often call his girlfriend right before a show, and if she didn't answer, he assumed she must be cheating on him, and he ran out to find her, leaving the band to play without him. He was also controlling and would wield his ego in unsavory ways.
He said, you know your girlfriend Kim? I said, yeah. He says, well, I took her back to my place and I slept with her. And she was gorgeous. He says, but you can have her back now. Because, it just goes to prove that you are only the prince and I'm the king.
While Vince was in the US, the Playboys toured with Duffy Power, another rocker who was unpredictable and unreliable. When Vince returned to London, he met up with the Playboys outside the Two Eyes who were loading up to play a show up north with Duffy. The band invited him to come along, and as luck would have it, Duffy Power failed the show, so Vince went on in Duffy's place. Halfway through the show, Duffy showed up. Seeing his throne usurped by Vince, he proceeded to do what any rational person would do. He jumped up on stage, punched the drummer in the face, and drove off. Now with Duffy out of the picture and a few stitches in Bobby's face, the Playboys traveled to France, where Vince was to play a few additional shows that were originally booked for Duffy. When Vince arrived in Paris, he proceeded to purchase his most iconic piece of gear. A cheap dime store medallion of Joan of Arc that he wore around his neck, complementing his black leather gloves, painted on black leather pants, and a menacing bike chain that he swung wildly during performances. Another molting had occurred. This time, from the cocoon arose Le Diable Noir, the Black Devil. For the French, their dark prince had finally arrived. Having less exposure to American rock and roll than Britain, no one had seen anything, and I mean anything, like Vince Taylor. He flopped around floors, copulated with the air in epileptic spasms, grabbed the headstock of the lead guitarist's axe. He was handsome, pouting, screaming, a teenage heartthrob with a bad boy vibe that could steal your virginity by just looking at him. He was bad, bad, bad. And France loved him. Vince was signed to Barclay Records and quickly gained a reputation for inciting riots. And although there was a riot at one of his shows, he himself didn't necessarily incite it. During this period, he married his first wife and recorded some French ballads in an effort to soften his bad boy image a little bit. Now, by 1964, Vince had been giving it everything he had, night after night. Throwing mic stands, crashing on the floor, giving it all at every gig. And after a while, this causes a few problems. First of all of those bruises and jumps add up to a lot of pain, and people with pain tend to self-medicate. And Vince liked to self-medicate with booze. A lot of booze.
If you drink enough, alcohol will give you hangovers, cirrhosis of the liver, and what's more, it can even kill you.
The second problem is that the pure exhaustion starts to set in. But hey, it's the 1960s, and you know what will fix that?
You ought to have some pep pills, uppers, amphetamine, speed. Make you feel super good.
Amphetamines. Lots and lots of amphetamines. It keeps you full of energy for the show, and hell, it's fun, so you can sleep when you're dead. With this combination of these two ingredients, on top of some signs that Vince was a little egomaniacal and unstable, the obvious outcome was some weird behavior. This manifested itself in a few ways. He had a weird habit of making up odd lies about himself that he seemed to believe were true. As an example, he once said that he was related to Tenzing Norgay, the Nepalese mountaineer who was the first to climb Everest. He also said he was an airline pilot when he was a teenager. He was controlling and increasingly paranoid, and in November 1962, during a stint at the Star Club in Hamburg, he missed a show due to his typical "I need to find my girlfriend, I think she's cheating on me," that whole routine again. Horst Frescher, manager of the Star Club's response, he told Vince that he'd shoot him in the face if he saw him again. So that was the end of that. Coincidentally, because of this, the Star Club had an opening where Horst gave the unknown British band calling themselves the Beatles the slot. Wonder if that'll work out. As time dragged on, Vince was treading water. Despite his popularity in France, he couldn't quite get the exposure outside the country that he wanted. And he was swimming in a sea of mediocre ballads and lacking innovation in any way. He needed one of those breaks, and he needed it soon. And lucky for Vince, he got it. In 1963, his sister married Joseph Barbera. known to most as the Barbera in Hanna-Barbera. With Joe's connection and cash, he aimed to get Vince an American record deal. To arrange this, he set up a big showcase for Vince and the Playboys at the La Locomotive Club in Paris, the hippest and biggest club in all of gay Paris. This was Vince's shot at it, to break in America, to get the train moving again like he had so many times before. Just one little thing before the show, though. The band was dead broke, and they were owed large sums of money by a London promoter. So, Vince left the Playboys in Paris, traveled back to London to get some cash, and come back in time for the big showcase show. And here comes our next unfortunately, and it's a big one. In London, he received his payment, and also learned of a really hip happening party over at the Savoy Hotel. Bob Dylan, during his European tour, was in the hotel. Much of this is documented in the film Don't Look Back, where you can see Dylan banging on a typewriter while ignoring Joan Baez, scowling at Donovan as he plays whimsical British folk tunes, and trying to figure out
Who threw that glass in the street?
Yeah, this is
Who
right.
did it? Now you better tell me, man. If somebody don't tell me who did it, you're all gonna get the fuck out of here and never come back.
Vince Taylor, woefully unhip Vince Taylor, goes to this party at the Savoy where a guest offers Vince a new cool drug. It's called
lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD.
Vince, not knowing what it is, asked. The guest told him it was amazing and like, man, you can fly. Vince thought this sounded like fun and took the acid. Having an absolute blast of a time on the acid, Vince asked if he could get some more, then proceeded to spend the majority of the band's money on 200 British pounds of LSD 25. 200 pounds. Now, I'm not sure what this amounts to exactly in terms of dosage, but I do know that 200 pounds in 1965 is a lot of money, and that LSD is pretty cheap today, like less than $10 a tab. Furthermore, early 1960s acid wasn't the low-grade 25 micrograms per hit it is today. It was incredibly strong, like 200 mics strong was average. So, without knowing for sure, it's pretty safe to say Vince had just purchased the equivalent of over 1,000 hits of acid. And proceeded to eat that acid nonstop for the next week straight. Wait a minute. I wonder if Vince threw that glass.
Right.
I didn't throw any fucking glass in the street, man.
Okay, we'll find out who did it.
And now we come to the point of our story in which Vince has completed his final molting and is born again. No longer the Black Devil, he is now the Son of Jesus.
You got hold of that bad acid and didn't come down for 2 weeks. You kept telling everyone that you were Jesus Christ, and then you jumped off a roof because you thought you could fly.
And he's returned to Paris.
So we said, Vince, you've got a gig tonight, you know that, don't you? So he said, yeah, I know that. He said, that's what I'm back for. I said, Vince, you went to London to get some money. Have you got any money? So he said, money is the evil of the earth. He said, money, and he took out a lighter, took out all the money, and he burnt, and he was just burning the money, and we just went, what? And he threw it on the floor, and then the carpet in the hotel started burning as well.
The next day, Vince returned, now clean-shaven, hair properly coiffed, and a clean set of clothes. At this point, the band assumed that Vince had just gone on some sort of a speed bender and he had slept it off, returning somewhat to normal. He does apologize for the night before and says that he felt a bit strange, but was better now. Vince and the band then arrived at La Locomotive, where Vince, strangely, stopped and began to stare at a poster on the door with his name printed in big bold letters. He then proceeded to, quite calmly, remove a felt tip marker from his pocket, crossing out the name Vince Taylor and scrawling underneath, Matus. Vince Taylor was officially deceased. Born from the ashes was Matus, the Son of Jesus. The show had begun and the Playboys were launching into the opening bars of Come On Everybody by Eddie Cochran, which was their standard intro at the time. Then he entered the club, carrying a jug of water and anointing the foreheads of each fan as he walked to the stage, saying, God bless you. I am Matus, the Son of God. As his sister and brother-in-law Joe Barbera looked on in horror, he joined the band on stage and proceeded to self-destruct within 15 minutes, wrecking the stage and causing the manager to eject him, where he continued onto the streets, blessing passers-by and sharing with them the good news of the gospel of Matus. 24 hours later, he met up with the band again, where he told them, with great excitement, that they were catching a plane to California. When they asked about the flight, he simply said, "God is the pilot, and he's going to fly us to Hollywood." After this transformation, he spent 1966 to roughly 1972 in London, severely mentally ill, trying to live off his fading fame while always reminding people that he was once a big star. Around the summer of 1965, right after that meltdown, he met a young English musician named David Jones, who was ready to change his name to David Bowie. Bowie was captivated by Taylor, and he listened intently as Vince explained that he was Jesus, but also an alien. He was dressed in white robes and sandals, and talked in depths at the cafe as the two walked across the road.
He dragged out this world map, and we were crouching on all fours outside Tottenham Court Road tube station, and he was showing me where all the aliens had their bases throughout under the Arctic and like in this mountain, and there's people stepping over our map, and I think, what the hell am I doing in the middle of Russia with this bonkers American looking at the map of the world, and he's telling me, and I thought, there's something in this, I'm going to remember this. This is just too good.
Bowie, being blown away with the idea of this completely disassociated rock star that thought he was an alien and simultaneously Jesus Christ, used this as the basis for his Ziggy Stardust character. For Vince, who had been largely forgotten except for his loyal fan base in France, it looked like he might fade into obscurity. But as had happened many times before, a little luck fell his way. In 1979, The Clash, who were rising to prominence, started working on their new album London Calling, which would become a record that is constantly at the top 10 of any Rolling Stone magazine list. In the studio, they were preparing to start recording, but needed to warm up to get loose. Vince Taylor's forgotten B-side, Brand New Cadillac, was a staple of Clash gigs at this period. Though it wasn't planned to be a part of the album, they ripped through a blistering rendition of it as a warm-up in the studio. Unbeknownst to them, producer Guy Stevens had the engineer rolling tape and captured the performance, warts and all. When the final VU meter needle settled back to 0, Stevens announced over the talkback, "Great, that's a take." The drummer shot back, "What? No. That was just a warm-up. The tempo is all over the place and it speeds up at the end." Guy then succinctly answered with, "Boys, all the best music speeds up." And it was this very take that became the first song recorded for London Calling and introduced a new generation of fans to Vince Taylor. First take. Meanwhile, in the world of Vince, around May 1980, he meets Joe Strummer and Paul Simonon at the Pigfoot restaurant in Paris, where, according to Paul, they had a 5-hour conversation where Vince explained that the Duke and Duchess of Windsor were planning to kill him by feeding him poisoned chocolate cake, and that he had just appeared on TV with the Muppets and the Sex Pistols. Okay. At the end of Vince's life, he had finally found peace. He had changed his name back to Brian Holden, returning to the original shell he had created, and was treated successfully for his alcoholism. He then married again in 1983 and spent the rest of his days in Geneva, Switzerland. At the beginning of 1991, he was diagnosed with cancer, and according to legend, ran into an old friend where Vince told him this: "If I die, you can tell them that the only period of my life where I was really happy was my life in Switzerland." He died August 28, 1991, at age 51. But his legend and his music live on.